Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Ignorant Intellectual on Media. I'm your host, Scott, or The Ignorant Intellectual, and today we have a thrift store haul that we should be going through. It includes 17 books and 4 Blu-rays. All the thrift stores that I went around to the city, I found a good amount of good books, but not a lot of films and absolutely no CDs. So this will be more of a book-oriented video, but it should be fun. I mean, if you're a cultural pursuer like myself, you listen to music, you watch films, and you read books. So all three are great media um, types to, let's say, ingest or consume, if you want to put it that way, in modern language. But let's see what we got, and let's see how interesting it is. It should be. I've got some of the greatest novels of all time here, and let's go through them. And 4 films, 2 remakes, and a Clint Eastwood film, and one of the greatest films ever made. All right, so it should be interesting. All right, so let's go first to this 1988 book, written by Michael Blake, and it is basically the book version of the film Dances with Wolves. Now, I've done 2 videos on film versus book, all right, and when I go out searching for movies and stuff to add to my library, or books to add to my book collection, or CDs to add to my CD collection, I'm looking for this type of book as well. Books that directly relate to a film that I compare the two. So far, I've done Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and the second one, what was the second one? Starship Troopers. So this is going to be another one that I do. So I picked up the book so that I can read it because I have seen the movie, but I haven't read the book. So this is basically what Kevin Costner based his great film on is this book by Michael Blake. Okay, so after reading that, you'll look forward to a book versus film comparison. All right, so next up is 2 books by Ayn Rand. All right, if you don't know who Ayn Rand is, she's an American writer. Well, Russian descent, I guess. She's Russian American. I don't know. I don't know all these hyphens that Americans use. You're basically American of whatever descent, wouldn't you be, right? And Canadians, people say people say I'm Canadian, even though they, um, their ancestry might be, from any place in the world, right? We don't really hyphen Canadians. In fact, immigrants who come in, we don't call them immigrants, we call them new Canadians, right? So, um, and celebrate your culture in Canada. Anyways, I'm going off topic. So basically, I have Ayn Rand's 2 greatest books. All right, we have The Fountainhead, which was put out in 1943, and Atlas Shrugged, which probably is her more famous of the 2 novels, and that was put out in 1957. But basically, these 2 novels espouse Ayn Rand's philosophical ideas of what the best type of life is, basically, and she called it what was called objectivism, objectivism, ignorant intellectual. But basically, her philosophy is, and she, instead of deciding to write a bunch of philosophical books, she decides to write, Anthem, these 2 books, and some other books on what her philosophy is. And she does it more in fiction form, right? So it's interesting. You can actually read an interesting book as well as, get a philosophical idea behind the book. And basically, her philosophy was coined objectivism, all right, which basically states, I'm paraphrasing or whatever, but basically, um, reality is real. Um, Human beings know reality through their senses, so it's not like we're living in a dream, it's real. And from that, you can deduce that the moral reason for you to living is to pursue your own happiness. All right, so it's kind of like a egocentric philosophy, right? So e- e- ego pragmatism, maybe. I'm not sure, but anyway. So basically, you're on this planet. This planet is real. Your reality is real, and your pursuit of happiness is the main point of your life. All right. is to become happy. Okay, and how you become happy through logic and everything else that you're using is uh, to pursue a dream or pursue what you want to pursue, and do that for your life, right? And that's what will make you happy. And basically, the only way you can do that is in a structure that is um, a defender of individual rights. All right, so individual rights are more important than group rights, and you need an economic system that is, like laissez-faire capitalism. All right, you can't have a communist system. So it's going to be capitalist. It's going to be democratic, with an emphasis on defending uh, individual freedoms. All right, rather than group freedoms. Okay, so she's anti-socialist. She's anti-communist. She's probably more on the right of the political spectrum, and she espouses this philosophy in these two books. And these two books are extremely good reads, even though they're huge. I mean, these things, you're going to be spending some time reading them. All right. Out of the two, I found The Fountainhead more interesting to read than Atlas Shrugged. I really enjoyed this one. This one was good, but this one I found better. All right. But basically, what I got from her philosophy in these books was this 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 idea, okay? And the idea is the reason why their society isn't the betterment of the group, it's the excellence of the individual, all right? Meaning that let's let's use an example like the NBA, all right? So the NBA does not exist, or the reason for the NBA does not exist so that a group of men can play basketball. All right. It's not there for that. What it's there for is so that the individuals in all those players have the competition, or have the the culture or the space or whatever to become great. All right. So the NBA isn't there for its fans. The NBA isn't there for the owners who own the teams. All right. In so much as unless that's a dream of a person, is to own an NBA team, and therefore they're pursuing their own happiness, right? The reason the NBA exists is for people, let's say like Michael Jordan, meaning that there's an environment, there's an area, there's a space where the cream of the crop rise to the top, and it's the job of everybody else, of these great men, all right, to help propel them to the top, all right. So we're talking about the Carnegies, the all the great men in history, the capitalists or whatever in history. The point of my life or your life is to prop those people up on our shoulders to make them great. All right. So basically, it's the NBA is made for people like Michael Jordan, not for your average NBA player. All right. His job is to create an environment so that Michael Jordan can excel. All right. Um, the reason for any endeavor that's social, that's group, is so that the great individual in that group can be propelled and put on other people's shoulders, become as great as they can. Other people have smaller dreams, have smaller things um, that they'll pursue to make them happy. All right, but there are those great men in society, and the only way to have a proper society is to set up a society that will allow them to excel. All right. So that's basically what I saw as Rand's philosophy. So the reason for society isn't for the group, it's for the individual and his excellence, and everybody else is to help them. Once you identify this quote unquote, let's say alpha male, or this this person that has a huge dream rather than a small dream, or has an idea, is to help them achieve that, because that's their pursuit of happiness. And your pursuit should be helping them out if you don't have a great dream of your own or whatever, right? That's my idea of what Ayn Rand's philosophy is. And whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it makes for very interesting reading, and it makes for two books that are two of the greatest books of the 20th century in literature or fiction, all right? And you should spend the time reading. I mean, they're huge. They're huge books. See how thick they are, and the print. All right, the print is very small on them to get them into this size of a book. She writes very long tomes. I mean, if you want to approach Rand in a more casual way, then maybe Anthem would be the book. Where will I show it, here or here? Anyways, Anthem. It's a good introduction to her ideology and philosophy or whatever, right? And the book is like, a regular sized book. All right. So, but if you find her, let's say Anthem, interesting, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged should be on your list of reads. All right. So that's Ayn Rand. All right. Next up is one of the greatest novels ever written, and it's in my top five of every book that I've ever read, and that's Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s 1969 novel, Slaughterhouse-Five. This is a stunning piece of work. All right. This is an incredibly good novel. I can't emphasize this novel enough. If you have not read this novel, it's a really, really, really awesome read. It'll blow your mind. It's basically science fiction, time travel, war. It's got all these elements where there's a guy in the main character is named Billy Pilgrim, and it goes through his life, and you don't really know exactly when you read this whether what he's telling you is the truth or it's a dream. Is it reality? Is it just fiction that's going on in his mind? It's an extremely good. It's basically an anti-war novel because you come to the conclusion that maybe a lot of the stuff that you read in this book is um, because of shell shock or like post-traumatic stress disorder or whatever it was called, shell shock back in the day when this was written. All right. Or is it real? Like, I mean, he travels through time. He gets kidnapped by aliens. He goes to Dresden. He was a prisoner of war in World War II. He survived the bombing of that city and everything. It's an extremely, extremely good book. And when I read it in maybe two sittings because I couldn't put the book down. Extremely good book. So if you have not read this, pick it up. I'm telling you, you'll say, thank you, Scott, for pointing this novel out because it's one of the greatest books I've ever read. All right. So that's Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, and it was published in 1969. All right. Next up is one of the greatest sci-fi, you know, novels of all time, and that's H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. All right. And I also picked this up. I have read it, but I'm going to reread it, and I'm going to watch the original movie, and then I'm going to watch the Tom Cruise adaptation of the original movie, and then I'm going to compare them all in another video of book versus film. Right. So everybody knows this book, or at least the film. It's basically about an alien invasion, um, and one of the great sci-fi books of all time. All right, okay, so that's War of the Worlds, and now I have another book, or three books put together into one book, um, of another great series of books in sci-fi, and it's one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest. A lot of people argue that these three books, the Foundation books, so Foundation, and Empire, and Second Foundation is the greatest sci-fi series of books ever written. Now, those three were written together, and then Asimov returned to this series, like 20 or 30 years later, and wrote like three or four other novels that you can add to this series. But basically, this is the core of the series. The Foundation series are these three books, and the Everyman Library. All right, put them out in one hardcover. All right, and this I did a small introduction to the Everyman Library, the modern version of the Everyman Library. All the books are kind of this size, hardback. They're reasonably priced, and it's all classic literature, philosophy, that kind of thing, and they're numbered. All right, so right now there's just under 500 volumes in it. Now they're not numbered on their spine as the old versions used to be. The paperback sized hardcovers that used to come out from the Everyman Library. These are only numbered on the inside on the title page. So this is number, if you can see it at the bottom, is my finger. This is number 332 in the series. All right. So there's over 400 volumes in this series, and they're really fun to collect. And there's not one volume in it that isn't a worthy read. So whenever I'm going around to the thrift stores and I see one of these volumes, all right, I have, I think, probably about 100 of them so far, right? I will pick it up definitely. All right, they're all nice cream color print. They're all very easy to read. They're well done, um, and they have a ribbon bookmark attached to them inside, right? So um, they're nice volumes, and I collect these volumes. This is one of the, you know, 5 or 6 different series different sets of books that I collect. All right, so I can add this to my collection. But first, I'm going to put it in Mylar, which is a plastic wrap to protect the dust jacket, because as you can see, it's already, whoever owned this book didn't take very good care of it. It's already bent and everything else, right? So I'm going to protect it, and see how it's browning as well. This is what happens when you leave it in an environment that isn't conducive to book preservation. The person may have been a smoker as well, because the discoloring of this book looks like that smoke brownish coloring that you get on things that are in your house when you smoke inside your house, right? So, all right, so that's Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, all right, in a nice Everyman library, okay. Um, Next up after that is this huge book, and it's called the Andy Warhol Diaries, all right. So this is basically edited by Pat Hackett, all right, and basically Andy Warhol wrote a lot of stuff down about his life, all right. And these are all the entries of his diaries, or his writings that he kept to himself until after his death or whatever. And then Hackett put them all together and put out this. How many pages is this book? It's a good amount, like, yeah, over 800 pages. All right, and it's basically entries. They're set up like diary entries, and basically, Andy Warhol was one of the big names in the 1960s. I mean, he knew everybody from presidents to, like supermodels to, entertainers to actors to politicians, everybody, right? And his parties were the parties that you wanted to be at, and his presence um, was like iconic, and obviously his art stuff from that time period is considered great as well, right? Even though the Marilyn Monroe, what do you call those, prints, that he did, and the soup can and that kind of idea, right? But basically, there's a lot of interesting entries about other people, what he thought of other people. There's also about his own life and his own thoughts, how he thinks, his philosophy and everything, all through kind of like journal entries, right? So a lot of his journals, well, most of his journals are in here, right? So this is a very good and interesting look into American culture, that counterculture of the 1960s or whatever, early 1970s, right? Um, this would be a good book to read. All right, so I'm going to protect this book's cover as well, because see when you don't protect your books in Mylar, see what happens to them over time when they're on the shelf? They rip, right? Okay, so you need to protect the dust jackets. All right, so I will do that after I do this video. All right, so that's the Andy Warhol Diaries, edited by Pat Hackett. All right. So next up is um, one of the greatest true crime books ever written, but this one isn't written like how would you call it? Like a crime writer would, like a journalist would. This is written like a writer, like a fiction writer would write it, right? So it's basically a novel, but it's like a true crime novel where what he's writing about isn't fiction, it's reality. I mean, he gets some of the details of that actual, that murder or whatever, incorrect or whatever, but him and Harper Lee, if you remember Harper Lee, um, went to the area. So basically, it's easiest just to read it. On November 15th, 1959, in the small town of Holcomb, Kansas, 4 members of the Clutter family were savagely murdered by blasts from a shotgun held a few inches from their faces. There was no apparent motive for the crime, and there was almost no clues. Now, the two guys that that did this, their names were Richard Hickok and Perry Smith. Both were executed for the crime, and basically, uh, Truman Capote Truman Capote heard about this before actually those guys were captured, and he went down to that town and started interviewing everybody and taking notes and everything. And then he ended up coming up with this book, which is kind of like a narrative, a fiction. It's written like a novel, like a fiction novel, but it's actually not fiction. All right. and it's one of the all-time great true crime books. It's probably my second favorite true crime book behind the the most best-selling true crime book of all time, which is, Helter Skelter by Victor Bugliosi, the guy that prosecuted the Manson family. He wrote a book, a really thick book on that, and that was one of the more interesting true crime books. Well, it is the most interesting true crime book I ever read. Bugliosi did a really good job in writing that book, but so did Capote with this book. It's called In Cold Blood, and it was published in 1966. All right, so after this, so if you're looking for books that are similar to Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, there's like two books, um, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which Clint Eastwood made into a film, starring Kevin Spacey. But basically, that is another kind of true crime fiction book. All right, is really it's a really good read. All right, it's about a homosexual man who committed a murder in the South in the United States. All right, so um, and like I said, Clint Eastwood made a film about it. And the other one is I think it was a Russian novel. I wrote it down. It's called Operation Massacre. No, it was like a Portuguese novel written in South American novel written about a murder in South America, which came out before this one. That one came out in 1957. So those are the three main, true crime books that are kind of written as stories, as novels rather than, like a newspaper article. All right. So, okay, next up after that is A. A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh. This is the first of two short story collections that Milne wrote, basically for his son. Um, and it just blew up, right? Disney grabbed a hold of this book and made those films. And anyways, it's a great book to read your child, and it's one of the all-time great children books of all time. I don't really have to talk much about it, right? It's published in 1926. All right, so that's the next one. The next one after that is Nietzsche. All right, if you enjoy philosophy, you definitely need to read some Nietzsche. All right, so um, if you want to start with Nietzsche, Twilight of the Autos is probably your best bet for an introduction to Nietzsche's philosophy, and then read some other of his books, Beyond Good and Evil and Thus Spoke Zarathustra or Thustra. Would probably be the two books that you should read most importantly. But a good intro is this Penguin classics of Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist, and it basically, he basically shoots down all the Greek philosophers and Schopenhauer, which was another German philosopher, um, and he kind of puts forth his idea of life and what exists. And it would take much too long to sit down and explain Nietzsche's brain to you in a video like this. All I have to say is, of all the great philosophers, Nietzsche I found is the most accessible of the German ones. All right, German philosophers are an enigma. I mean, it's almost like reading Russian literature. Russian literature is probably the most difficult out of all literature to read, and German philosophy is probably the most difficult of all of all philosophy to read. But Nietzsche, you can take out of that because he's a lot easier to comprehend and a lot easier to read than most German philosophers, like Hegel or Heidegger or those guys, right? Um, so if you want to approach German philosophy, maybe pick him up first before you really delve into German philosophy, because yeah, it's difficult. At least for me, it was. But this guy wasn't, and I would highly suggest if you're a depressive person not to really read him. Maybe avoid him. I mean, avoid philosophy in general. I think. Well, no, I can't say that, but if you're a depressive person reading Nietzsche, his fatalism is not. It may even make you sadder or more depressed. So I don't know, but he's one of the great philosophers, and if you want to read German philosophy, he's one guy that you need to read. All right. Next up is one of the greatest 20th century novels, written in 1988. It's almost like a novel, but a kind of like a self-help book as well. And it's Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. And basically, this is about a shepherd who travels from Spain um, to Egypt, to the pyramids in Egypt, and it's a story of his travel from, his shepherdhood in Egypt, and his travels to get to the pyramids in Egypt because he's had a reoccurring dream that there's some sort of treasure there that he's supposed to find, and so he travels to Egypt, and this is basically who he meets along the way. It's almost like Pilgrim's Progress in a way, where what the pilgrim ends up going from an earthly city to heaven, and he travels along the way and he meets these characters. Well, this is kind of an idea like that as well. He meets an alchemist, he meets an American guy, he meets so they don't necessarily, or do they, represent certain ideologies or certain forms or whatever, right? So, um, but this is one of the books, let's say post 1970, that has been read by more people than almost any other book during that period of time, because it's such a like a mind-blowing book, and it's kind of like a self-help book, written in a fiction story, right? So basically, this is a very positive novel. If you want some positive vibes in your life, maybe you're sad, maybe you're in a situation in your life that isn't all that great for you, and you won't want to read him, let's say, during that time. But reading him, yeah, read this novel. It will give you some positive energy. All right, because basically, I wrote it down what this novel is basically about, and it's basically it, its philosophy is that if you have a dream in your life, if you have a pursuit that you want to pursue, and you're honest about it, and you're straightforward about it, and you want to pursue it, the universe will conspire to help you achieve that goal. All right. And basically, you'll see that because human beings, in my personal opinion, are naturally that way. If they see somebody that's working hard towards a goal, they will help them find that goal. They will help them achieve that goal. It's just in their nature, especially for people that they love, or people that they find um, not attractive like physically, but attractive as in their energy. Do you understand what I mean? So there's nothing more attractive than a woman or a man pursuing a goal and wanting to achieve it. And because they do, a lot of people don't have a goal because what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. And some people just never figure it out. There's others that have a goal in mind of their life, and they have a drive towards that. And it's a very attractive feature in them. And you want to help them achieve that goal. That's what this book is basically about, is the universe will conspire to have you succeed if you want your dream and you pursue it. All right. And that is a very positive message, and that's the message that you're going to get from this book. All right. All right. Next up is A Theory of Criticism, From Plato to the Present, and this is edited by Raymond Selden. All right. And it's basically a history of criticism. All right. And there's nothing better than a critic, right? They kind of point out things that maybe you don't see, right? And I'm no literary critic or other critic, but this basically goes through the history of it. Um, and you get an idea through reading this on the whole world of criticism and where to get other books to read. So I picked this book up because I thought it would be an interesting read. So, The Theory of Criticism, From Plato to the Present. All right. Next up is a novel by John Berger. All right. This one came out, and when did this come out? It doesn't say. I didn't write it down. So let's go look at the copyright page. If you want to know when a book was published, go to the copyright page. All right. So 1972. All right. And this is called G, and it's by John Berger. And basically, in this luminous novel, winner of Britain's prestigious Booker Prize, John Berger relates the story of G, a young man forging an energetic sexual career in Europe during the early years of this century, 20th century, I'm assuming. With profound compassion, Berger explores the hearts and minds of both men and women and what happens during sex to reveal the conditions of the Don Juan's success, his essential loneliness, the quiet culmination in each of his sexual experiences of all of those that preceded, the tenderness that infuses even the briefest of his encounters, and the way women experience their own extraordinariness through their moments with him. All right. So basically, it goes through the psychology of Don Juanism, or being a ladies' man or whatever, and the goods and bads about it, and why women respond to that type of thing, and so on. It's quite an interesting read if you haven't read it. I wouldn't put it up there with the greatest novels of all time, but it's very interesting if you're ever curious about that Don Juan ideology, right? So John Berger's G. All right. Next up is one of the greatest American novels of all time. You can't really argue with it. It's Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which is basically a story about a woman who accuses a black man of rape, and he ends up going into court being accused of it. And it's basically about race relations in the United States, about uh, class classes of white people, and a whole bunch of other things. All right, but basically, it's one of the great race novels in the United States, and how, let's say, the justice system treats black people. All right, and it won the Pulitzer, if I remember correctly. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize. It was also made into a book. Sorry, a film starring Gregory Peck, which is also an awesome film. So I've read this book and I've watched the movie. I'm going to do both again and do a comparison of the two in another video. All right. So that's To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. All right. Next up is Gertrude Stein's Three Lives. I don't know a lot about this. Gertrude Stein was, an expat from the United States who moved to Paris and had, a house that basically all the literary greats from, F. Scott Fitzgerald to Ernest Hemingway. Who else was over there? Sinclair Lewis, I think. Anyways, was a whole bunch of different people that would go over to their house, and they discuss literature and other things. All these expats from the United States or whatever in Paris, right? So, um, and then she wrote this book, Three Lives, which is basically three novellas put together in one book by the Penguin. Penguin 20th Century Classics. It's these light green versions of them. You get the classics that are in the black books, but the light green ones are all from the 20th century, right? So, and this supposedly is one of the great Gertrude Stein books and one of the great reads of the 20th century. So, I have not read it and I don't know a lot about it, so I'll read it and see what I think of it. All right, and the books are starting to stack up to get in the middle of the camera, so let me move some out of the way here. All right. So next up is Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. All right, and he basically was what? He was the Roman emperor, like in the second century AD, and basically he did a lot of writing, and he wrote mostly in Greek, if I remember correctly. And he wrote, like, I don't know, 11 books. They weren't. He never really named them. It's other people have translated them, decided to write that they're called his meditations. But I think there's 11 volumes of them. Don't quote me on that, but I know there's more than, I think, 10 volumes. And basically, this is you know, uh, they take the best out of those 11 volumes and put it into one book or whatever. So it's like a primer, let's say, on Aurelius's writings, and it basically is like his answer to what's the good life and how to live the good life, right? So basically, he goes through most of it. So let's say some of and they're usually smaller entries, like journal entries, right? They're not very long, all right, but they have little nuggets of wisdom in them. So this is basically a book on wisdom, and it's like a primer of how to live a good life, right? So let's say, keep thyself to the first bare and naked apprehensions of things. Remember that thy mind is of that nature as that it becomes. Anyway, so they're basically little nuggets. And a lot of people have read a lot of his stuff because he's an intelligent man. He had a lot of wisdom, um, and God, it's survived like 2,000 years. You know what I mean? Almost 2,000 years, like 1,800 years, right? All right, so that's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Um, Next up is, and I think this is the last book. Yes, it is one of the greatest novels of all time and arguably the greatest Russian novel of all time, although I think maybe Crime and Punishment might give that a run. But this is Karenina. Anna Karenina. It's always hard for me to say that last name, by Leo Tolstoy, which is basically a 19th century huge tome, huge novel about a woman who has an affair on her husband, and leaves him and escapes to, where is it? Is it Italy? I think they go to Italy, and then they return back to Russia, and all these consequences happen. It's one of the great tragedy novels of all time, and it's an engrossing read. Now, I have not read this translation, which is by Richard Pavir and Larissa Volokhonsky. All right, this is one of the more modern translations, but usually, all right, I don't know if it's a rule of thumb or not, but usually the more recent the translation, the easier it's understood, all right? Because it's being translated into the language that you speak, right? So you may have a translation. Let's say this came out in the late 1800s, if I remember correctly, 19th century, all right? And you have a translation at that time. That language isn't exactly the same as the language we use now. So maybe a translation from, let's say, 1990 would be more relevant for you to read and make it easier to read. So this translation, when was this translation? It's one of um, the more recent translations of the book. All right, so yeah, 2000. So this was translated in 2000. So this is probably, if you're going to access Tolstoy in translation, if you don't read Russian, right? Um, Maybe the, if it's done well, all right. And this is a Penguin book, and you can count on Penguins to do a very good job, right? Penguin has that reputation, right? Um, a more modern version of it usually is the better version. All right. So if you haven't read Anna Karenina, I think your literature expertise is lacking, and you need to read this. I mean, I think this is even more important than his novel, War and Peace, his philosophical novel, War and Peace. But he did have a tendency to write very large books. All right. So that's Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. All right. And those are the novels. So now we have four Blu-rays that we're going to get to, and then we'll be done. All right. So the first, let's see, which one should I do first? Let's do RoboCop first. All right. So this is RoboCop. All right. But it's not the original from 1987. It's the remake, directed by Jose Padilla. Padilla. All right. Jose Padilla is not a big director. I don't even know if I have any other of his stuff. This might be the first thing I've gotten, but its attraction is to see the difference between, let's say, RoboCop in the 1980s with the technology for making film back then to RoboCop in the in 2014, when like special effects and everything have improved so much. It would be interesting to watch. I think I watched this, but if I did, I don't remember it. So maybe it's not a very good film. But I'm going to watch it again, and I found it on Blu-ray, so that's always cool, right? Is it a Blu-ray DVD combo? So that's cool. You know how I like Blu-ray DVD combos. All right. So basically, this is about a police officer working in Detroit. He ends up getting shot up pretty badly, and so uh, instead of him dying, they end up, you know, making him into a cyborg basically, and and then he goes out and fights crime as basically half robot, half man, right? And the Verhoeven uh, directed film from 1987 is an amazing film. It's one of the greatest, sci-fi type of films of all time. And Verhoeven had a tendency towards ultra violence, and it's interesting to see a cop, who's half metal and half machine, going out and killing bad guys, right? Um, so it's quite an impressive film. So I don't know if this one will live up to it, but let's watch it. and we'll see. All right. So next up after that is another remake from 2002, and it's the remake of the 1975 film Rollerball. And this one, I don't know how. I have not seen this one. I've seen the original, um, so I thought maybe let's do the same thing that we did with RoboCop to see what, with the advancements in technology and filmmaking, what this would look like, like 30 years later, right? So I don't know if the selection of the actors was a good selection. I'll have to see. But everybody remembers him, from the American Pie films, right? The comedy sex films, right? And I don't know how well he'll stand up as like an action hero. But anyways, we'll see what happens. What is his name? Chris Klein. Chris Klein is his name, right? And you got LL Cool J, which is kind of cool, but I like LL Cool J. His acting, not so much. His music, yes, right? His rap is really good. Um, Mama said knock you out, extremely good. Anyway, um, so we'll see how Rollerball is. I've got very low expectations of this film, so we'll see what it's like. All right. The next up is I have this film on DVD already. So when I saw it on Blu-ray, I said, okay, I can pick it up and combine them. And that's Jersey Boys, which is a Clint Eastwood directed film. All right, I collect Clint Eastwood films, and this is basically about the story of Frankie Valli and the Four Tops. The group from the '60s, the '60s, '70s, '80s. Big Girls Don't Cry, Walk Like a Man. That group, right? And basically, it's like a biography of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. All right, so I have not seen it yet. The Blu-ray I got sorry, the DVD I got recently. This is a DVD Blu-ray combo. So now I can replace it and have the Blu-ray, the upgrade. All right. So I'm always looking for upgrades. Like I have about 5,000 films, and I'm slowly upgrading a lot of those films. If they've come out on Blu-ray, I usually find them used or whatever at a reasonable cost. Like these ones I found for $3.99 each. All right. Um, and then I just upgrade the DVD. I take the so it's a good. It's a good example right now. So I just bought like 114 Blu-ray cases off of Amazon for like just under $100, just over $105 for 114 of them. For these ones, the ones that have two room for two Blu-rays instead of one. Um, and because what I do is I'll collect the DVD, find the DVD, and then I'll find the Blu-ray, and then I'll have a Blu-ray and a DVD on the shelf, which takes up twice as much space. And I'm going, my favorite type of thing is when I find the Blu-ray and the DVD in a combo in a Blu-ray case, right? And I go, why do I have to go find something that was put out that way? Because it might have never been put out that way. It may have only been put out on a DVD, and then 10 years later or whatever, it's put out on a Blu-ray, but it doesn't have the DVD in it. It just has the Blu-ray, and it's never put out as a Blu-ray DVD combo, right? Um, why would I be satisfied with that? Why not just take the initiative and get this for like a buck, and then just take the DVD out of the DVD case, put it in here, and put the Blu-ray in here, and then take the cover from the Blu-ray, put it in the double disc Blu-ray case, and now I have the Blu-ray and the DVD together in a Blu-ray case, and it takes up half the space on on the shelf, right? So for a little bit of extra money, like I said, an extra dollar per movie or whatever, you can combine the two, get rid of the DVD case, and just have the Blu-ray case. You still have the DVD and you still have the Blu-ray. A lot of people, they won't do that. They'll just, oh, I found Jersey Boys on Blu-ray. I don't need it on DVD anymore, and they, donate the DVD or sell it or toss it or whatever. I like keeping the DVDs because, um, I transfer them onto my laptop, and a DVD transfer is a lot smaller than a Blu-ray transfer, and my hard drive on my laptop uh, is only so big, right? So, um, and the laptop screen is only 15.6 inches, and the difference between a Blu-ray or a DVD on a laptop screen is not all that great. You can watch a DVD quite easily and enjoy it. But I enjoy DVDs anyway, so even if they're on a big screen. All right. Anyway, so that's the third one, Jersey Boys by Clint Eastwood. All right. And last is I found this one, which is also a replacement. All right. So this is Apocalypse Now, but it's a double. So I have this on DVD. All right. This is basically the 2 disc edition, which is basically Apocalypse Now and Apocalypse Now Redux, which came in out in what, like 2000. I wrote it down, 2001, and it's basically Francis Ford Coppola goes into the film and adds like another almost hour, like 49 minutes to this film. So this film is originally 147 minutes, so just over 2 hours. So 2 hours and 27 minutes long, and he adds another 47 minutes to it, so it makes it over 3 hours long. So you have the theatrical version in here, and then the Redux version, uh, where Coppola added the 47 minutes to it, and you can watch either one. All right, so it's a double disc. All right, so on Blu-ray, and I have this on DVD, so now I have it on Blu-ray, and I can combine the two. Now, in order for me to combine the two, I'm going to have to go buy um, a Blu-ray case that can hold 4 discs, which isn't cheap. I mean, they're selling for like, maybe if I buy them in bulk, I might be able to get them for like $5 each. But I think like one of them is like $10, so I don't know if I'll end up doing it. Maybe I'll just keep the two of them on the shelf, because $10 is not really worth the combined thing. $1 is. If you can replace it for $1, right? That's not bad, but for $10 to replace it, to combine them two, the shelf real estate isn't worth the $10, for the extra space for one more Blu-ray. So I'll probably just keep this like this. Now I have it on Blu-ray and I have it on DVD. All right. And if you don't know this film, first thing it's like, where are you? Where have you been for the last when this came out in 1979? Um, it's one of the all-time great war films. It's a Vietnam War film, but it's mostly about traveling up. I can't remember the name of the river, and going to visit Colonel Kurt, which is this guy here, and he's a friggin' megalomaniac, crazy guy. One of the most impressive characters in modern film is him. Marlon Brando, was it Marlon? Yeah, Marlon Brando. Uh, anyways, it's an extremely good film. A lot of people argue this is the greatest war film of all time, but my argument would be this is the second greatest war film of all time, behind Full Metal Jacket by Stanley Kubrick would probably be my favorite war film. All right. So anyway, so this is Apocalypse Now, one of the great war films, came out in 1979. Then they did the Redux, which added like 47 minutes to the film. It basically made it a whole different film almost. Well, not really different, but uh, uh, a film that's over 3 hours long, if you want to go through that. And that Redux disc is in here as well. So you have the Redux and the original theatrical version. All right. So that's Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola. And those are everything that I got. So 4 Blu-rays and what was it? 17 bucks. All right. And I will watch and see which ones I'll add to my collection or replace in my collection. And we'll go from there. Most of the books that I buy, though, there's a purpose for them, for me to read, to do a film versus book video, or they're to resell, so that I have some money that I can go out and buy some more stuff, right? So that's always, I've made a video of that. It's called collecting physical media on a budget, and it goes through that kind of thing. I'm not going to rehash it here. All right. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, this thrift store haul, and we'll do another one in the near future. And thank you for watching. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, I would appreciate it. And I will talk to you in my next video. And you have a very good day. And bye for now.